to suspend just for a minute or two and get a quick turnaround. We have one witness that will be on video conference, and we'll do the sound check, and then we'll resume our meeting. So we'll suspend just for a few minutes. Completed now. We're ready to begin. If you could resume your seats. Welcome back. Pursuant to Standing Order 10831 and the motions adopted by the committee on Tuesday, January 30th and Thursday, February 15th, 2024. The committee resumes its study on the distribution of federal government funding among Canada's post-secondary institutions. And it's my pleasure to welcome and thank our witnesses for coming this morning. First, we have Olds College of Agriculture and Technology, Dr. Ben Cecil, President and CEO. Some great work in Olds right now, and I'm looking forward to your testimony. The University of Guelph does a lot of similar work. Ontario Tech University, Dr. Stephen Murphy, President and Vice Chancellor, is joining us via video conference. And welcome to Dr. Murphy. We'll start with 5 minutes from each of you, and we'll be close on time. So let's get started with Dr. Ben Cecil for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Cecil, President and CEO of Olds College of Agriculture and Technology, and I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon. I'm here to talk about the distribution of federal government funding impacts on college research activity. I'd like to address the matter from three perspectives: equity, eligibility, and impact. Let me begin by setting the context first of research funding at colleges. There are approximately 120 publicly funded colleges in Canada that support local businesses, entrepreneurs, and social innovators through research expertise of its faculty and its staff. These colleges advanced over 8,000 projects, created 2,400 prototypes, designed over 1,800 new products, over 1,000 new process developments, and 900 new service offerings, and that was just in 21-22 alone. These advancements were driven by industry and business partners who had a real challenge to their organization that they could not solve and sought the help of a college to assist them in solving a real-world problem for their organization. The intellectual property generated by these advancements remained in the hands of the external partners, ensuring the results of the research remained within the Canadian economy. I'll speak to the impact such advancements have to the economy shortly, and specifically within the context of my institution. But what I can state at this juncture is that those advancements I cited above were supported with only 2.9% of federal research funding, or about $110 million. Which leads me to my first point: equity. The federal research funding programs need to be reconsidered and reframed so colleges are considered as an equal partner in the research ecosystem. Colleges have demonstrated over the last 20 years that we have an impact on the communities and the industries we serve. We deliver results, real-world solutions to real-world challenges in real time, which of course begs the question: is the distribution of federal research funding addressing the priorities of Canadians? Is the funding supporting the challenge-based research conducted at colleges adequate to address the issues facing Canadians today, such as climate change, affordable housing, and food security, to name just a few? Colleges have risen to the occasion by increasing their capacity and capabilities to support challenge-based research, enhancing Canada's social and economic well-being, yet they do so on only 2.9% of the federal research budget. There's an opportunity before this committee to help redefine and reframe the role of colleges as equally valued full partners within the federal research ecosystem. I just mentioned colleges as equally valued full partners, which leads me to my second point: eligibility. Presently, the federal research funding system uses metrics such as the number of publications or prior Tri-Council funding success, or holding a research chair position, or the number of HQPs to award research funds. These are not the metrics of colleges. Our metric, and the language we use, is impact. Colleges are being asked to have similar administrative functions and due diligence as universities in areas related to research data security, technology transfer or IP management, ethical compliance, and animal care compliance. Colleges can't support the same level of administrative function as universities without a similar indirect cost funding model as universities. The simultaneous inequity and ineligibility for colleges to receive the same extent for research support funds needs to be reevaluated. And finally, I'd like to address my last point: impact. Colleges are deeply embedded in their regional economies. Connected to industry, colleges are asked to help address real-world challenges being brought forth by an external partner with a real-world solution that they can implement immediately. That linkage between college, solution, and commercialization is impact. It's measured by revenue growth, job creation, innovation, and economic growth through commercialization. Olds College is ranked number 2 nationally for research impact amongst colleges. Since its inception in 2018, the Smart Farm, the cornerstone of all research at Olds College, has supported 263 companies and organizations, 142 projects, resulting in 394 process and product improvements, over 720 jobs created, and contributing over $811 million directly back to the firms that we have worked with, which channels its way directly into the Canadian economy. And that's over $6.3 million per small and medium-sized enterprise that we work with. Members of the committee, that's impact. The college sector provides a significant impact to the Canadian economy, and this brings me back to my original question: is the distribution of federal research funding addressing the priorities of Canadians? Do the investments Canadians make into our research ecosystem have a direct impact on the things that matter most to Canadians? Jobs, food security, climate change, affordable housing, etc. Are Canadians seeing value in their investment, and is that investment giving them the output, the impact that they expect? Thank you very much to the committee. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Cecil. And now we'll move to Dr. Murphy from the Ontario Tech University for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for having me today. It's good to be back. I'd like to start off by stating that Ontario Tech is a STEM-based institution with approximately 12,000 students. We're located in Oshawa and I'm proud to be in the Durham region. We do not strive to be a comprehensive university. We know our strengths, energy and engineering, and we focus on them. I'd like to focus my comments today on how Canada can address two major problems related to research. First, Canada has a productivity problem. We are less productive per capita every year and have fallen behind our traditional global peers. As we know, at the heart of the productivity problem, the Government of Canada invested $3.42 billion in research in 21-22, but compared to our global peers, Canada has fallen way behind. In 21, Canada invested just 1.7% of GDP in R&D, as compared to the US at 3.5, Japan at 3.3, Germany at 3.1, the list goes on. Academic research and development is a major driver of Canadian innovation and economic growth. Universities conduct more than 40% of Canada's total R&D, producing over $55 billion annually in economic activity and supporting 680,000 direct and indirect jobs in communities of all sizes, including the Durham region. When it comes to research funding, however, Canada is falling well behind our peers who have made significant new investments to support advanced research training. At Ontario Tech, we're recognized internationally for our research strength, and our impressive reputational trajectory continues upwards with a fresh distinction as Canada's Research of the University of the Year in 23. In fact, Research InfoSource recently reported its 5-year University Spotlight, highlighting a key number of research areas of growth, which I think are germane to our conversation today. We're ranked number 1 in Canada in cross-sector collaboration publications percentage growth. So that talks about the importance of collaboration in research. We're ranked number 2 in Canada in corporate research income percentage growth, which means that we are working with corporate entities to solve practical real-world problems. And we're ranked number 2 in Canada in international collaboration publication percentages growth, which means that we're solving research dilemmas that are facing the globe. With total university research income now surpassing $23 million annually and growing to about 8% every year, Ontario Tech boasts strong growth in not-for-profit research income, international government research income, and international collaboration. A recent international survey ranked us as a top 3 engineering school, and we're extremely proud of that. We're leaders in R&D. Now, the R&D problem, we have not seen productivity growth in an awfully long time, and over the past 4 decades, we've slipped significantly compared to other countries. The Bank of Canada argues that 3 elements contribute to stronger productivity. They are capital intensity, labor composition, and multi-factor productivity. All 3 of these point to the importance of the job market and being highly trained in fields like AI that will change the productivity needle. Ontario Tech is well positioned to respond to this labor market demand, and it's through programs in computer science, engineering, business IT, business analytics, and artificial intelligence where we have really well-established research programs where we're going to be able to graduate our labor needs to counter the productivity problems you need to have that cutting-edge research and ideas that take shape in our students' minds and blossom as they enter the workforce. The number and dollar amount of Canadian graduate scholarships, as we know, has not kept pace with inflation of the growing graduate student population. It's estimated that each year thousands of recent PhDs are leaving Canada to pursue careers abroad, representing an annual loss of $740 million to the country. This poses a serious problem for our future and our growth. We urge the committee to focus the government, on ways the government can ensure that sufficient funds are available to all universities and accessible to researchers at institutions of all sizes, that they submit successful research grant applications. We're a glowing example of an institution that's only 20 years old, but has to go up against the U15 and others with established track records. We're really proud of the Canada Research Chairs we have and the trajectory that we are gaining, but we are definitely swimming against the current. Every university has its competitive niche. At Ontario Tech, all things energy, engineering, and STEM more broadly is our areas. In fact, roughly 60% of our programs are in STEM fields, which exceeds the provincial average by over 20%.
Okay.
As a first step,
Thank you. We'll have to work in the rest into answers possibly, but we're going to go to our first 6-minute round with Mr. Soroka, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll start off with Dr. Cecil. Could you please describe the specific returns on investment that Olds College has observed from its Smart Farm initiative, and how do these returns compare to traditional educational models?
Thank you for the question. As mentioned in my opening remarks, we have a significant impact coming from the Smart Farm. The Smart Farm is the core of all of the research we do at Olds College. Our focus is agriculture, always has been and always will be. The Smart Farm is the cornerstone where we integrate technology and applied research on an actual commercial scale farm. That commercial scale operation has, over the last 5 years, received less than $7 million of impact funding from the Tri-Council, yet $811 million returned to businesses and partnership firms that have worked with us over the last 5 years. That's 142 projects, over 219 SMEs, almost all of which are based out of the Alberta and Western Canadian economy.
With programs like the college's brewery, greenhouse, and butcher shop, how does Olds College measure the success of these programs in terms of student employability and skill development? And what feedback have you received from industry regarding the readiness of graduates from these programs?
The industry has been incredibly supportive, whether it's brewery, meat operations, or any of our other programs. Our measure of success is exactly as you've identified. It is the job readiness of our graduates. Because we are directly connected to the industries that we serve, our industry advisory councils tell us what they are expecting of a recent graduate and the skill sets that they require in their place of employment. That gets integrated directly into the curriculum, and as such, our students have a very, very high degree of employability. Over 92% of our students are in field. In other words, what they have studied is where they end up working in the same field. 92%, a little north of 92%, have jobs directly related to their field of study.
So looking forward, what are new areas of applied research that Olds College is planning to explore, and how will these areas align with the evolving needs of the agricultural industry and technology advancements?
Some of the challenges we face in agriculture are part of what is known as the Grand Global Challenge. How do we continue to feed more people on less land with fewer negative impacts of commercialized agriculture? How do we minimize our carbon footprint, at the same time maintain yields on a continually decreasing scale of operation? That scale of operation at the individual farm level increases, but globally the land mass is decreasing. That challenge results in greater integration of technologies. Therefore, we have programs on technology integration in agriculture. For our students now, because we are the School of Agriculture and Technology, the integration of the two is absolutely fundamental to understanding the future of ag. Case in point, the newest John Deere combine has more onboard computers than the shuttlecraft. 32 onboard computers on a modern combine, it basically drives itself. But it doesn't service itself, so it needs to have the technical supports in order so that the farmer, the producer, can actually have the services needed to continue to produce at the scale that literally feeds the world.
Yeah, I know there's quite an involvement of technology. I had a John Deere combine many years ago, and it drove itself at that time, but it's amazing when one ground wire doesn't connect, all the problems it can cause.
Exactly.
So how do partnerships with industry leaders contribute to Olds College strategic goals, especially concerning applied research and technology development? And can you give examples of how these collaborations have directly benefited students and the agricultural sector?
Absolutely. The partnerships we have with industry are foundational to the work that we do. While we have had an impact of hundreds of millions of dollars on the regional economy and the national economy, almost all of that support has come directly from industry. Our research profile, while supported a little bit by the Tri-Council, is primarily supported by industry itself. We have a direct connection to them because they have problems that they look to us to simply solve. And in the context of our world, we can't wait for a PhD student to turn out a paper that has a result after 4 years. We need solutions in season. And in season for us is a very quick turnaround. The partnerships that we have help us continue to advance research, whether it is studying carbon sequestration, nitrogen fixation, groundwater support, clean air and clean water, soil productivity, the list goes on and on. What impact does that have for our students? We have over 60 students directly connected to research at the college. They are employed by the firms and by the college itself to support research in those firms. But in a curricular perspective, the relationships that we have with our industry partners allow us to receive equipment on a regular basis as donations. And every 4 weeks, those donations and equipment gets turned over in our labs so that the students are working on the latest and greatest technology that they will literally see in the field upon the graduation. That partnership, without those partnerships, we could not do what we do at the college. On any given day, in our trades and skilled trades facilities, we have between $7.5 and $8 million of equipment on loan on any given day. Without our industry partners, we do not have the funding to make that a sustainable operation for the college.
Just at time. Science on the farm would be a very interesting topic. I'd love to go into that one. But Dr. Jacek, let's stay on topic for this morning. 6 minutes on this study, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both witnesses for excellent presentations. I'm going to start with Dr. Murphy. I'm not sure if you were able to join us for the first hour, but we did receive what was to me a very persuasive presentation by the Canadian Association for Graduate Studies. And they talked about a method of redistributing funds to universities that was based on the number of graduate students as well as a criterion of academic excellence to be involved somehow in this redistribution formula. I was wondering, Dr. Murphy, how you felt about that proposal, if you think it has merit over the current system.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think that we're absolutely talking about the right thing in terms of how do we think about redistribution. Those answers aren't always easy. What I would say, my colleague talks about impact, and I think that that's a really important thing. How do we quantify impact? I would say, for our researchers and our student researchers, their biggest marker is, are they actually having an impact in industry? Are they helping to move the needle? I think that we've got to move beyond traditional metrics around publications, et cetera, to include the extent to which our technologies and our IP is getting translated into actual industry productions. So all that to say that I believe that we need to come up with a different system that would allow for smaller and medium-sized universities to get a larger size of the pie, because certainly we have areas of specialization that the U15 do not. I'm not sure that the proposals I heard today, based simply on graduate student numbers, will bring us to where the desired outcomes.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you've had any experience with the discovery grant application process that is administered, I guess, by NSERC. We received a briefing note from the U15 which described this particular process. It seems very lengthy, very comprehensive, perhaps. It seems to take a year for applications to be processed. Do you have any comment on that process? I always say UOIT, but Ontario Tech University. Have you had experience with that particular process, and do you see it as something that is working for you? Can it be improved in any particular way?
Yes, thanks for the question. Yes, we obviously our strongest area is in NSERC funding, so have a lot of experience with discovery, as we do with SHRC funding and CIHR. What I would say is that there's a commonality among the three. That our researchers would all comment that they spend far too much time filling in forms, redoing their CVs to a common CV standard, than they do with their research. I think to the extent that the discovery process is perhaps slightly more onerous than others, it gets a bad rap. I think that the lessons to be learned are, let's try to reduce the bureaucratic red tape around applications, especially in the forms that require to be filled out. No one's asking us to skimp on the ideas and the science that we're putting forward. But in terms of the actual forms and working through the bureaucratic red tape, I think those are the elements that we see in discovery and in the other granting agencies, to be fair, that need to be seriously reduced.
Thank you very much for that. It certainly struck me as being excessively bureaucratic. Dr. Cecil, you talked obviously about equity, impact, and the need for more funding, the type of work that colleges do. And I have Seneca College in my riding, and I'm a great fan of the work of colleges. Do you have any ideas, apart from the absolute quantity issue in terms of the amount of funding dedicated towards colleges, but are there any ideas on how that, between all of you, those funds should be redistributed or distributed in a different manner?
Thank you for the question, and it is an intractable one that we have been dealing with since our inception into research about 25 years ago. The third point that I was talking about is also eligibility. While there is inequity in the system, part of that comes from the fact that colleges are simply not allowed to access certain funds, or the way that they are structured. Case in point, the IE, the infrastructure investment grants that NSERC held for a number of years, colleges were eligible. We are also eligible under the new Mobilize grant. However, the Mobilize pot is much, much smaller than it was under the IEs, and as such, eligibility is limited. Or, people have indicated to this panel before, well, colleges are available to hold Canada Research Chairs. However, the criteria under which Canada Research Chairs are evaluated, colleges don't qualify. So it doesn't matter how large the CCIP pot is and how much the pool is within any given institution. If it's ineligible, it's ineligible. So it's about creating that equity.
Thank you very much. Now for 6 minutes to Monsieur Blanchet-Choquin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses who are here. I have a question for you, Dr. Cecil. Last week we met... Oh, we'll just wait a moment.
Pour la traduction.
I've paused your time. Yeah.
Merci.
Thank you. And so, Dr. Cecil, last week we met Mr. Marc Nautel from Niagara College, who talked about applied research and the novelty of this type of research compared to university-level research, which has a longer history. So I'd like you to talk to us about applied research in your institution.
All of the work we conduct at our college is entirely applied. And as such, the application goes directly back to our industry partners. The application of the research that we do is not held by the institution, it's not held by the individual researchers. And that's one of the value propositions that colleges bring to the table. Because we do not have an interest in holding the IP, because the work that we do is not investigator-led, but industry-led, we are not coming up with problems to be solved because it's investigator interest, but rather an organization comes to us and says, I have a problem, please help me solve it. The nature of that applied research makes the world of difference in our world, and our value proposition that we do not hold the IP is attractive to them, and that's one of the issues that universities typically face. They want to hold on to a portion of the IP as part of their revenue stream. That's what makes our work very appealing from an applied perspective.
Je vous laisse replacer votre oreillette, Monsieur Cécile.
I'll let you put your earpiece back on, Dr. Cecil. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the history of colleges and CEGEPs. Nicole Bourgeois, who represented universities, told us on March 21st that universities, Capilano and Yukon, have challenges because they don't necessarily have the pool of talent, the infrastructure, and the history of funding to access certain grants. So since research in colleges is fairly recent, such as the Olds College Center for Innovation, I'd like to know if you face similar challenges.
Indeed, we do. Similar challenges are faced because of the newness of our entry into applied research. While we have been doing research in various forms for the better part of 100 years at our college, the application directly to the work that we do now at the Olds Center for Innovation is challenged by the existing framework. The existing framework identifies opportunity based on researcher capacity and researcher awareness. We've seen at this committee presentations where phrases such as the right research being done by the right individuals or researchers at the right institutions. The question I have to challenge the committee with is, who defines right? The challenge that we have to address now from the Olds College perspective is organizations like the smaller institutions, whether they're Capilano University or Kwantlen or ourselves. It is understanding the capacity that we have built and leveraging that capacity across the ecosystem. We were challenged 20 years ago, build capacity so that we understand that you have capacity. Well, we've developed it. The infrastructure, the system itself on what gets measured, how it gets measured, and how it gets valued does not leverage that capacity that we have built.
Merci, c'est assez précis et complet comme réponse. J'aimerais vous entendre.
Thank you. Your answer was precise and thorough. To improve the distribution of funding, considering that only 2.9% of total research funding is given to colleges, and you represent about 120 establishments, how do you square that?
In order to address the eligibility issue, that would be a significant advancement forward. Allowing colleges the opportunity to actually lead research opportunities. Case in point, a lot of research today has the partnership, the major partnership and collaboration grants, with universities being the lead, and quite frankly, and for this committee and your deliberations, colleges are very often seen as simply a checkbox to be achieved in order for the university to get the grant. We have a lot more to bring to the table. And in fact, given the applied nature of the research that we do, industry very often approaches us first, and then we're finding a university partner. Can the committee and the federal funding model rethink the relationship so that colleges can be the lead and the university is the partner? Because it's the colleges that have been approached by industry to solve a real problem, not an investigator-led problem. So that would be a very practical solution.
Donc, concrètement, M. Cécile, est-ce que vous...
In concrete terms, do you suggest funding programs specifically for colleges and CEGEPs to allow you to access adequate funding?
Very briefly.
As I would very much love to see a pot that is dedicated just to colleges, I think a rebalanced and reframed system that takes a systems approach, the entire ecosystem, to leverage the infrastructure that Canadians have invested into colleges and universities, I think is an equitable solution.
Great, thank you. And now for 6 minutes, Mr. Cannings.
Well, thank you. I'm going to start with Dr. Murphy. You mentioned in your statement at the start about how Canada is not, I guess, putting in its share of research dollars when compared with other countries around the world. We're falling behind a lot of our major competitors and partners in the world in that regard. And I just had a science policy person from the UK in my office yesterday, and he commented on that. I'm just wondering how smaller institutions like yours, more focused on applied research, how should the federal government up its game in this regard that would help rebalance how institutions such as yours can do the work that we really need researchers to do in this country?
Thank you for the question. I think that maybe I'll illustrate it with an example. At our university, because of our location and our history, we're extremely strong in the nuclear energy space. And so one of the areas that we all know is experiencing a renaissance is nuclear power, whether it be small modular reactors or baseload plants. And so in order to advance Canada and the world, you need organizations like ours that has the only undergraduate program in nuclear engineering, followed by master's and doctoral programs in nuclear engineering. So we need that kind of specialized talent to be able to move research from the lab into what are SMRs that don't yet exist. It's a really great example of how the federal government needs to invest in a technology so that we can have proof of concept here in Canada through CANDU technology or other technologies of SMRs indeed working in the field in Canada, and then, begin to sell those assets abroad, which I've also been involved in terms of initial talk. So when we talk about our competitiveness on the world stage, it all comes back to how seriously are we taking research that will drive industries that will drive international trade, areas where we can be leaders in terms of our Canadian presence and our footprint today, not areas that we want to aspire to be, which I would say are also very important in this discussion, but areas we already lead in that we don't leverage effectively. And I think it's in those areas where federal investments can help the ecosystem to move even more quickly.
And you also mentioned the situation with grad student funding in Canada, which hasn't kept pace with inflation, hasn't been upped in over 20 years. In fact, we're hoping for some good news on that in the budget later today. But most grad students don't get their funding through that program, although a significant number do. They get it directly from the principal investigators. And I'm just wondering how that situation plays out in a small institution like yours, and how we can help graduate students get the funding they need through increased research grants to smaller institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're quite right that at our institution, we've got about 16% of our grad students are federally funded, which is actually a fairly high number in comparison to peers. And it points to the real importance of funding our research and of course our professors, because, as I'm sure you've heard many times over, our professors are the ones who help with the university to provide RA-ships, TA-ships, but even more importantly, to provide opportunities and scholarships through their grants to be able to attract these people. So it's only when we combine federal scholarships with potentially provincial scholarships that are fading in number with institutional offers that are pulled from faculty's grants accounts that we can be competitive. And as those grant accounts diminish in real dollars over time, it makes our ability to attract students and keep them in Canada significantly decreased.
Okay, 1 minute left. I'll turn to Dr. Cecil then, and we've heard at other times in this committee how the funding models for colleges don't really match the reality of the different sort of research you do, when you react to a company coming to you saying, we've got a problem, and you want to access research funds, but there's an intake that you just missed. And so you said, you know, you're dealing with agriculture, things have to grow at a certain time of year. Is there specific ways that those funding opportunities for you can be altered so that it makes more sense for colleges and technical institutes?
Fantastic understanding of the issue. The challenge we will be faced with, and this will be one of the serious deliberations for this committee to consider, is in the reimagining of all federal research funding, is there the opportunity to create an open pool that is allocated to a college or a university that allows them to be opportunistic, that allows them to address to an immediate and an emergent issue? The whole world came to a stop for COVID, but the whole world had to respond quickly. The coffers were opened. When an opportunity presents itself to a college or a university, is there an open pool that it can draw from quickly, but already allocated to the institution, not back to the feds?
Thank you. We were a little bit over, but that was a valuable piece to get into our study. Ms. Rempel-Garner for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Dr. Cecil, you talked about the indirect cost of research funding. Are there ways that, like, what am I trying to say? There's a lot of redundancies that happen with indirect costs of research in terms of how the federal government allocates it across different institutions across the country. You know, for example, in Calgary, there's a lot of overlap on, like, tech transfer offices or research admin support. Is there a way that the federal government could restructure that support to give more access to those types of services for institutions like yours that are based in a region around a university that already gets a lot of support for those sorts of things?
I think one of the challenges that we will have to address with that issue around the research support fund is at the university levels, they have a lot of infrastructure to support those indirect costs, less so at a college. The connectivity between regional economic development agencies, granted councils, innovate labs, and things of the sort, those are also considerations because as being federally funded, it is about taking a look at the entire ecosystem. Are there ways to ensure that other granted bodies have the opportunity or the obligation and the mandate to support other forms of research supports, like institutions at Olds College? Capilano has been referenced before. Institutions that don't yet have that infrastructure, can they leverage it?
So on that point, you know, I'm trying to think of ways, like concrete recommendations for this committee to look at restructuring federal research funding allocation that could benefit nimble institutions like yours that are working on real life problems. So one of the ways that you know, we've kind of heard tangentially from other institutions is to make different types of institutions eligible. But I'm wondering if it's a broader principle. Like if there's a certain type of research that the federal government wants to fund, it should be less dependent on the institution that's conducting it and more dependent on whether or not the institution has the capacity to set out, deliver on a certain number of criteria. So for example, public access to research, knowledge translation, certain types of IP ownership policies. Do you think that's a way of perhaps rethinking or reframing how federal research funding could be allocated?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that is a wonderful opportunity to explore, as long as it is also paired with equal eligibility between colleges and universities.
So this is what I'm getting at, is like if we sort of reframe the probably dated dichotomy between universities and colleges in terms of that being the eligibility criteria and start looking at the type of research and capacity to support research, is that kind of what you're driving at on a high level? Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, what some of our granting agencies or people in our federal public service might say is, well, we want to also be able to be sure that whoever is applying for this research funding or whatever institution is doing it has the capacity to deliver on certain results. Is a way that non-U15 institutions, that we could square that circle, making them both eligible and address concerns around capacity to deliver. Could stage-gated funding be, like, let's say you were going for a fund, your institution was going for a fund that you'd never been able to apply to before. Could stage-gated funding be a requirement for first-time institutions on certain types of research funding?
It could be. It would also depend on the metrics being used on those stage gates. And that would be critical.
Like, the researchers have been hired, the infrastructure is up and operational, meeting certain deadlines, right? Just not necessarily in terms of publication, but in terms of actually conducting the research, right? Would that be something that that the granting agencies could be looking into?
That would be a reasoned approach, yes.
Conversely, there's sometimes a lot of big institutions will get these grants and then not deliver anyways, right? Is stage gating something that the federal government should be looking at, where there have been instances of either in their research funding review, in terms of where there's been allegations either of misappropriation or significant changes to a research project's staffing levels? Is that something that the government should be looking at as well, too?
And I think that would be part of the government's due diligence on any reevaluation, is to ensure that the public stakeholder is well represented and their funds are being supported properly.
Super. Thank you. Ms. Bradford, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses today. It's fascinating testimony. I'll be sharing my time with MP Ryan, but there are a couple of questions that I would like to get out there first, please. Dr. Murphy, previously to your current role, you were the Dean of the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metro University, and now, of course, you're the President and Vice Chancellor of Ontario Tech University. Would you mind explaining to us what difference you've noticed or how it affects applying for research and being favored with research funding from the federal government based on whether you're in a large city or a smaller community and the size of the educational institution?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say that my experience in 3 different Canadian Ontario universities has been that it's less about are you in a major city as it is the track record of that institution in terms of grants. The people who sit on granting agencies and review grants, as I have, are successful researchers. So they have typically come from U15 schools traditionally, and of course that expanded out to include more and more institutions as they became successful. So as you saw Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson, become a university, come into its own, it would win more and more grants in time. I'm seeing the same thing at Ontario Tech. You have to prove yourself and then establish yourself in larger partnerships, then lead those partnerships, etc. It's a long process to get to the top, and it's not always the most efficient process. It's not always to speak to Michelle Rumpel-Garner's question, it's not always based on the merits of who can do the work most effectively as who's traditionally done the work. And so I think that it is really important to note that each university has its own niches where it excels in, and to, in my view, to be able to target funding towards those areas where it indeed can perform to its highest capacity.
Thank you for that. So now for my last question, before I turn it over to MP Turnbull, I am really, really interested in the wind tunnel, and if this committee had obtained permission to travel and see some of these things, it would have been on my list. But unfortunately, we didn't get to travel. So could you explain to us about the ACE Fluid Mechanics Lab? And you alluded in your opening statement about how much of your research funding comes from the private sector as opposed to the public sector. And I think that is increasingly important. So if you could explain about that facility and how it's funded. I suspect a lot of the auto companies, et cetera, might have been involved in maybe creating it and in utilizing it, and just how that works. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Our ACE wind tunnel facility is one of a kind in the world. It is both geothermal, it is aerodynamic. This is the place where Silicon Valley and the rest of the world comes to test their electric vehicles, to test their autonomous vehicles, and to test everything from bicycles through to the Canadian ski team. So this is as applied as research gets. This is where we see engineering colliding with human factors. This is where we see applied research because, again, we've heard a lot of things that are outdated nomers in the testimony. Universities are as applied today as colleges are. We are doing work that's at the cutting edge of where electric vehicles are going. One of the big issues with electric vehicles, because you take out the noise from an engine that we're all used to hearing, is when you get an electric vehicle, the wind noise seems incredibly loud. And so one of the areas that we've been working with manufacturers hand in glove in, our students, our researchers, all involved, is how do you reduce wind noise in EVs to make it more comfortable in the cabin and for it to be less noisy in there. It's actually a very big issue when it comes to a buy decision. We're also working on autonomous vehicles.
We're going to have to call it short, and I'm sorry, Mr. Turnbull, we weren't able to get over to you, but we will go to Mr. Blanchet-Chocat for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to come back to the concentration of funding, research funding in Canada. So, Dr. Cecil, do you think that it's necessary to stop distinguishing between colleges and the Quebec Centres of Technological Transfer and other colleges where applied research is very important, and focus more on the results that this could lead to for small and medium-sized enterprises and local economies?
I would agree entirely with that statement. Leveling the playing field creates equity for the entire ecosystem. And when we take a look at our stakeholders, that is the Canadian population. They're looking to all of us as elected officials and officials inside the government's agencies to be good stewards of the public purse and to ensure that the results that we come up with on their behalf suit their needs. Leveling the playing field between cégeps, colleges, universities, creating eligibility and equity across a system so that we take an ecosystem approach will benefit Canadians immensely. To be bold, I believe this committee has an opportunity to make a generational impact on Canada's ability to compete at a global level by taking a very focused look at reimagining the federal funding ecosystem around research. If we were to become a global powerhouse of applied research, research that had its impacts into, whether it's electric vehicles, as my esteemed colleague has said, or new forms of feeding the world, this will change the direction of Canadians, or the perception of Canadian research at a global level. And this will have an impact for the entire 21st century.
Okay, thank you. It's great to have that type of vision in the room today. Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'm just going to turn back to Dr. Murphy and ask if you had any comments or answers with regards to the question I asked Dr. Cecil in terms of would it be helpful and useful to have a different, perhaps, funding model for institutes of technology or colleges that are dealing with doing applied research with companies to be more nimble on a time basis, to access grant funds more quickly that fit with the problem at hand?
I certainly welcome any model. I understand that we have an innovation ecosystem. I think that colleges have been traditionally underutilized in that ecosystem in terms of what they bring to the table in terms of industry contacts, their abilities to do applied research. We certainly live in a model where universities work with colleges, work with employers day to day, bringing in whatever partner has the capacity to do so. So I think that a funding mechanism that enables dynamic partnerships where we're pulling the very best out of each of our institutions in service of the country and in service of moving forward IP into industry will advance all of our causes.
Thank you. That's okay.
Well, thank you. And the focus on applied, I'm also a graduate of Red River College, and we had a very strong tie with the business communities, and that's still the case. And it's great to have that kind of vision in the room, as I said. Thank you both for your testimonies, to Dr. Ben Cecil and Dr. Stephen Murphy, for your participation and your thoughts on this study of distribution of federal government funding among Canada's post-secondary institutions. If there is additional information we didn't get to, please do submit it to the clerk. And before we close, just a